We're all students of life, aren't we, anyway? So I hope you don't... Is the sound okay? Is that all right if I go like that? Everybody happy? If I go too fast, please feel free to stop me. Please ask questions at any time. I don't mind taking questions while I'm talking, and I'll allow for a few at the end as well. Has any of you heard me speaking about Steinhoff before? Wonderful. So it's a virgin crowd, as they say. Well, it's wonderful being here. Thank you very much. Steinhoff came across my way very quickly last year, more or less at this time. I hadn't known much about the company, and my publisher contacted me and said, would you mind having a look at this? There's so much confusion. What the heck's going on here? What's this company? And so I said I would, and this book was the result. So where do I start? Let me start by saying, throwing some numbers at you. Steinhoff, to date, they estimate the value destruction is about 300 billion rand. How much is a billion rand? 1,000 million, so that's 9 zeros. So when I say value destruction, it's not cash that's been stolen. That's the big difference between Steinhoff and many of the VBS Bank, for example. It's not cash, it's value destruction. So if you buy a share at 100 Rand, at one stage it was worth, the high point of the Steinhoff share was about 96 Rand. If you buy shares at 96 Rand, it's worth about 2 Rand today. Then the value destruction is about, 94 Rand. And the point is you're not going to get that money's not coming back because this crisis has been quite severe, and the only possible way this company goes forward, in my view, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, is if there's a thorough restructuring and it looks like a completely different animal. So value destruction, about 300 billion. So that doesn't only include the Steinhoff company, it includes associated companies as well. What I mean by that is, if you're a Shoprite Checkers and your chairperson and your major shareholder is Christo Wiese, by the nature of his association to Steinhoff, Shoprite got affected by this whole scandal as well, and their share price tanked a little bit as well. And there's a variety of other associated companies as well. So the estimated value destruction is about 300 billion. But so Steinhoff, this is Mr. Bruno Steinhoff. He was the founder and started this company in West Germany in the 60s. His parents were agriculturists, farmers, and after the war the Germans didn't have it easy and the farmers didn't have it easy at all. So he started buying and selling furniture, and he realized there's a great opportunity to buy very well-made furniture very cheaply in the east behind the wall, and then bring it across the wall and then sell it in the west at a profit. And he did very, very well, and the company grew from there. I want to just go into the history briefly. In the early 90s, 1989, early 90s, the wall came down, and Mr. Steinhoff's business had been growing quite rapidly, and then he realized there's a challenge. My factories are in the east, and suddenly they are part of a unified Germany. Suddenly they have to compete in the free market. Suddenly they are outdated. Suddenly this advantage that I've enjoyed for so long is actually a problem. If I want my business to keep going, I need to consider going into manufacturing as well and actually taking over these entities, and which he did. He took that decision. So he moved into manufacturing as well, took over about 8 factories in East Germany, recapitalized them, and the business kept growing. In the early 90s, he was introduced to South Africa via an associate called Klaas Down. Klaas Down was a restructuring specialist, so he would come into companies and struggling companies, break them up, get rid of the bad stuff, and keep the good stuff. And locally, media like to call him closed down. And there's still a lot of people in Port Elizabeth that have some ill feelings towards the gentleman. Nevertheless, they were friends in Germany. They lived quite close by to one another. And he told Bruno, there's opportunity in South Africa. Democracy has come in 1994. It's a country that's open to business, open to investment. There's lots of opportunity. Mr. Steinhoff came to South Africa. My understanding was at about 1996. And he walked into a company called Goma Holdings. Does the name ring a bell? It's a cheap furniture manufacturing firm, used to be in Garankuwa, close to Brits outside Pretoria. And he bought a big share in that company, and the financial director at the time was 28-year-old Marcus Jooste, and that's where their relationship started. So this was around about 1996. 1998, the Steinhoff Group listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So the Steinhoff business was still going on in Europe, and they called it Steinhoff Europe, and they were doing quite well there and growing quite well. But then they started doing well in South Africa as well. They started acquiring a bunch of smaller furniture manufacturing companies. One was called Bakker and Steiger. It was here in Cape Town. Another was Victoria Lewis, and one or two others. And then they listed on the Joburg Stock Exchange in 1998 at R2 a share. So that share price went up over, 20 years to 96 Rand, and it's back at about R2 a share today, to give you an idea of what's happened in the ensuing years. So they listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and they kept building this business. This was Mr. Jooste. At the time of this crash, this financial crash happened in December 2017. It's now more than a year ago. This is what the Steinhoff Group looked like. It was involved in 32 countries. It had 12,000 shops and 130,000 people working for this group across the world. Massive, massive conglomerate. Really successful in all in all ways that you want to look at a company, I suppose, in a sense, although now we know it's not the case. Some interesting points here would be that 50,000 people work for this Steinhoff Group of companies in South Africa, which is a very important reason, I would think, why this company needs to continue existing in some form or other. Often it is a small little pep stores in a rural town, which is probably the biggest shop in town, and where those people, if they had to lose their jobs, would really have very small chance of getting a different job. So there is some real lives at stake here, and families and communities, I would suggest. I've told you a bit about the history. I want to tell you a bit about Marcus Jooste. So going back a step to Mr. Marcus Jooste. Mr. Jooste was a Pretoria boy, and since writing this book, I finished with my research towards the end, 8th of May last year, I had to be done. So I had a very short turnaround time, and of course, then you're limited to what you can do. But what's interesting is, since the book, information has kept coming, and so some of the bits that I'm going to tell you isn't even in the book, but it makes for some fascinating insights. And I never interviewed Mr. Jooste despite several efforts. I did meet him in Parliament when he showed up eventually in September last year to do some testimony there, but it was very brief and he didn't really want to speak to me. But so some of the stories that I'm telling you you won't find in the book. And one of them is that Mr. Jooste, in the book I said he matriculated at Office, Afrikaans Seuns Hoërskool in Sunnyside, Pretoria. I like to say Sunnyside, they call it Arcadia or Hatfield. It's a really fantastic public school in Pretoria, Office. I'm sure you've heard of it. Excellent school, and he did matriculate there. And he matriculated top of the class, absolutely brilliant student, but not a big sportsman. And of course, in a boys' school, if you're not a sportsman, you're not one of the guys really. And maybe that. So the pictures I'm trying to sketch is some of the psychology behind the character, I suppose, and not as if I'm an expert in psychology by any means. I'm not. It's just interesting things to me that I find interesting. But apparently one of the stories which I've corroborated since is that he was actually only matriculated at Office. He actually was in another high school in Pretoria initially, where he was known to be a notorious bully. And he had a gang of bullies around him, his henchmen, and they would go around and bully the other guys in the school. And until one day, they say, one of these thin, scrawny, arm Afrikaner kids gave him a real beating in front of his friends. And his dad took him out of the school on the same day and put him in Office. So that was another interesting insight into the character, because he is known to have been a bully, known to have thrown his weight around, known to have surrounded himself with confidants who are at his bidden call and do whatever he wants. And to a large extent, look the other way, in my view. So Mr. Jooste then, after Office, he came down to Stellenbosch University. He had a bursary, and he studied at university. He did his chartered accountancy. He was at a residence called Vulcan Off. Have any of you heard of the name Vulcan Off before? Vulcan Off is a residence. I hope you weren't. Was jy in Vulcan Off, meneer? No, well, not that there's a problem with Vulcan Off. Vulcan Off is a very interesting residence at Stellenbosch. Dani Craven went there. He was the house father at one stage. Morne du Plessis, the Springbok rugby captain. Whitey Basson, Christo Wiese. Edwin Cameron was there. So it's a residence with a blue blood. People have gone through there from all walks of life. So he went there, was very lucky, and then he made a lot of contacts. People that still today, if you go into the senior management levels at Steinhoff around the world, you'll inevitably find people who went to Vulcan Off or people who had connections to Vulcan Off. So there's certainly an element of making very close ties all the way back then, and then taking that forward into his business career and surrounding himself with these people, these butties, I suppose, people who think the same, people who look the same, people who, if Marcus is the clever one, if he says it's like that, who am I to challenge him? Who am I to say, listen, what are you doing? This is complete rubbish. Because he'll say, well, if you just don't understand what's going on, get out of the room, or if you want to make something about it, we can arrange another job for you, that kind of thing. So Mr. Jooste, then after Stellenbosch University, he graduated first in the board exam when he did the CA. He's really brilliant. He did his military service at SARS, the South African Receiver of Revenue in Pretoria. Very useful. He became a chief director, I believe, or a senior director, and he did a lot of the work on companies that were in trouble with SARS. And one of the stories, which I haven't corroborated, of course, is that he left SARS with quite a lot of folders of companies that might have been looking for somebody to assist them in some way or other. At SARS, one of his very close friends was a guy called Rian du Plessis, who also went there with him from Vulcan Off. Rian du Plessis was the CEO of Pumalela Gaming. It's a horse company, gambling company, basically the commercial side of horse racing in South Africa. And we all know Mr. Jooste has had very strong ties to the horse racing industry in this country. I'll get a bit to that a bit later. So following that, he went to Goma Goma Holdings. He became the FD, and he met Mr. Bruno Steinhoff. This is the company, as I have indicated. So So this is the question people ask, what people don't understand. The question, I suppose, that surprised me the most of all. How does a company get so big and there seems to be these fundamental structural problems, never mind structural, fraudulent problems, and nobody seems to have picked it up? Well, how on earth is this possible? How on earth is it possible that a company like Deloitte could audit them for 25 years and never pick one thing up? And if there hadn't been a whistleblower, Deloitte would still have signed off the last set of results. There's no doubt about it. Because I'll tell you about how it all came out. It was a whistleblower. It wasn't Deloitte who picked it up. How is it possible that analysts, that traders, that people who work with our pension money didn't pick it up? And interestingly, the government pension fund was the second biggest shareholder in Steinhoff, and they are very sneaky, cheeky, I don't know what disingenuous is the best word, I guess, when they also want to throw stones at this whole mess, because this is a very important point, I think, and maybe I should keep it to, no, I'll say it now. If you are sitting on the board of a company, or you are a major shareholder of a company, you attend AGMs. You sign off on the votes. You vote every year on who's the auditors, on the big decisions that get made, on the big acquirements. You have a say on who is the management. You have a say. The Government Employees Pension Fund certainly had a say. What did they do? They went along for the ride as well. So that's just to one point. So nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw this coming. And overnight, 24 hours, Mr. Jooste resigned on the 5th of December. Overnight, this company went over the waterfall. And within a week, it had gone from 56 Rand to about 6 Rand, and it's at about 2 Rand now. So overnight, 24 hours, on the 5th of December, they saw 190 billion in value wiped out. And how could nobody see this coming? How? And this is my premise. It was going too well with this company. And let me just take a step back and say that there were a few who did say there's a problem. I highlight some of them in the book, and largely the greatest criticism they had, none of these people really thought there was anything potentially illegal necessarily, but they were unsure what was going on in this company. They could never really track year-on-year performance comparisons. This company was such a amoeba, I guess you can say, this mist of nobody really, it's big transactions all over the place. So some people who didn't invest said, look, we don't understand this business, so we're staying out of it. And some media journalists, there were one or two, a few, maybe a few more, who also commented critically. They were also sidelined. I want to get to that a bit later, but what I'm saying is there were some who did warn and say, watch out. But they were by far in the minority. So again, my premise, how did so many of these brilliant people around the world miss this? Here, and my premise is that it was going too well. So here's the numbers. This is from their annual report. I think it was the last one. Let me point some numbers out to you. So in that period, 2006 to 2015, revenue increased 346%. Now bear in mind, this was still largely a retail business at that stage. Now what happened in 2008? The markets came down into a heavy knock. Edcon is still in serious trouble, for one, many others. Look at the turnovers these guys were doing. 346% growth. Look at the profit. Profit for the years, the fourth line from the bottom, grew 553%. Isn't that incredible? Share price in 5 years to 2015 grew 300%. Those numbers are astounding, aren't they? If you didn't have a Steinhoff share, you were an idiot. You were a fool. Why the hell are you not in Steinhoff? These guys are showing numbers that nobody else can do. They are growing phenomenally. The management has a board with people the likes of Christo Visser, Johan van Zyl, Steve Boysen. I mean, these are the blue blood Afrikaner businessmen. These guys are brilliant. They know what they're doing. And of course, Marcus Jooste isn't a fool. Look at these numbers. So people who weren't in on it, who weren't in on the business, were considered to be idiots. And the analysts and the stock traders and the people who were making money for the investors, they were happy to be on the joyride. And the one or two, there were a few again who had criticisms at times and said, but Mr. Jooste, they were simply sidelined again. JP Morgan Chase had an analyst in 2007 who analyzed quite a bit and was quite critical. And Mr. Jooste went there with Mr. Len Konar, who was I think he was the chairman at the time. And Mr. Konar, I'm sure some of you have heard the name. I think he sat on about 100 boards. That's a joke. He did sit on many. But he considered himself an expert in corporate governance. Don't know if he still does. They marched to JP Morgan's office and demanded a retraction of this analyst report which suggested don't invest in Steinhoff and we won't because we're not getting clear answers on some issues. And the analyst said, look, I'm not retracting this. And then they called in, then they insisted to meet the boss. They met the boss of JP Morgan in South Africa or Africa, and he said, well, does your numbers and your stats and information differ from what our analyst has shown? And they said, they couldn't give an answer, so the boss of the JP Morgan Chase in Africa said, then we're not changing our report. Then they went over his head to America and they tried the same trick. Didn't work. So what happened was JP Morgan Chase just said, look, we're not covering this company anymore. We're not suggesting that it should be bought anymore. And here's the question, what did the rest of the industry do? Nothing, because everybody was making money. Then, to me, that's a major indictment in this whole mess, if nothing else. So funny numbers. Let me show you some funny numbers. So these numbers have come out of the annual report. Now you say Deloitte, and we say, but these numbers look so great, and it's got to be legit because these are all audited numbers signed off. Now look at this funny number. I mean, and I'm not a forensic auditor. I haven't done a forensic investigation here. I'm just pointing out obvious stuff that I picked up, and I can't understand. Maybe there's an answer. I haven't found one yet. Look at this funny number. What is the corporate tax rate for South Africa? What is the corporate tax rate? 28%, is it? 28% for companies. In the period that they were doing these numbers, what do you think their tax rate looked like? Look at that. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Look at that. 2015, 8%. They never paid more than 16% in a 10-year time. In a 10-year, how does an auditor look at that and not ask questions? Hey? Isn't that interesting? It's just things that I would have said, at the very least, this doesn't look... And again, SARS. Where's SARS in all of this? So there's a whole bunch of stakeholders that have questions that needs to be answered, in my view. I'm just pointing out some interesting ones. Let me quote another interesting one, another interesting number. Intangible assets. I'm sure you all know what intangible assets is. If you buy if an asset is worth, if this glass of water is worth 50 Rand, and I think there's a lot of value in it because there's hardly any water in the Western Cape, so the value is 100 Rand, and I pay 100 Rand or whatever, then that 50 Rand difference would be an intangible asset. It's the value, basically, that I see in that asset. That's my brief explanation of what it is. So intangible assets in this company reads like a horror story, in my view. If it was Coca-Cola or KFC, I would have said, okay, I suppose this kind of stuff makes sense. But have a listen to this. At end of financial year 2016, Steinhoff's goodwill and intangible assets on the balance sheet signed off was, sorry, just hang on, 2015, so the year before, 2015, intangible assets, goodwill, intangible assets was 9.5 billion euros. A year later, the intangible assets and goodwill had gone up to 17.7 billion euros. Okay? So I'm sorry I didn't do the currency translations, but it's a lot of money. So it had gone up by 86% in 1 year. 86%. And if you look at their non-current assets for that year, 2016, and it was the same to the end, intangible assets, goodwill, so it's not stuff you can hold. It's not a tangible asset, it's not a car or a house. Intangible assets was 69% of the group's total non-current assets. Was intangible assets. So when you look at the kind of acquisitions they were starting to do, Mattress Firm, they go to America, they buy Mattress Firm. Mattress Firm is a complete donkey. It's a complete dud. Mattress Firm is so stupid. They've got, I mean, when's the last time you went into a mattress shop to buy a mattress? I can't remember. So a lot of people, I mean, and in America even less so. You've got Amazon and other people, you buy your stuff online. If you do, Mattress Firm had mattress stores across the street from one another. They had thousands of stores. And they go and buy Mattress Firm for $64 a share, when the share price was $28 a share. How does that make sense? How? I still haven't found an answer, by the way. But apparently Mr. Jooste is such a genius, he sees things nobody else does, and that was apparently a good deal. And now, Mattress Firm has in the interim declared for bankruptcy. It's a complete dud, complete mess. So those are some of the numbers that I wanted to point out. This was the share price in the 5 years to the crash. You can see very clearly it went off the cliff there in December 2018. And those at the bottom, of course, is the share trade volume. So everybody tried to dump the stock, but it was a bit late for most. The pink line is the JSE's growth or pattern over that whole period. So that at the top is Steinhoff. So if you weren't in Steinhoff, you were a complete idiot. That's basically my premise as to why people looked the other way, because they were making money. And they probably thought, well, we don't understand it, but we're going to keep investing. I think it's Warren Buffett who said that, if you don't understand the business, stay out of it. But it seems like there's two chains of thought with Steinhoff. One was, we don't understand the business, so we're staying away, or we don't understand the business, but we trust management and the numbers are great, so we're going to be in on the ride. I hope I'm not going too fast. No questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. So the point is that there was a clue. If you look at the trend line, the comment is that at the end of 2016 it took a dip, and you're correct, sir, because the high point was in 2016, I think, when it hit 96, and then it went down and was about 50, 60 for a while until the final smash. And there's reasons for that. And let me point out. So again, you're correct. There were some other clues as well. Let me go here. So, what happens? Let me go back one step and go to this gentleman, Christo Wiese. Christo Wiese, billionaire, one of the richest men in Africa. He was the largest shareholder in Steinhoff. He lost about 60 billion rand of his personal fortune. So, what is Christo Wiese most well known for? The PEP Group and the Shoprite Group, both major retail businesses, and of course, Christo Wiese turned 76 last year. So you've got this massive portfolio of complex, I suppose you could call it, investments, holdings. And what are you trying to do? I'm paraphrasing, I'm thinking on his behalf, I suppose, try to bring them into a more manageable entity, I suppose. And one of those entities was Steinhoff. So Mr. Wiese started getting heavily involved in Steinhoff in about, I think it was 2011. when he started investing. In 2013, he got onto the board. So he only became the chairman in May 2016. So he was only chairman of this group for about a year and a half until this entire crash happened. And one of the drivers behind his motivation was the idea that Steinhoff would list on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. And why is that a great thing if you're a person with so many billions and such a lot of wealth? Because you call it externalization. So if you've got a lot of money, one day I might be there and you can take out 10 million a year out of South Africa. If you want to do, that's the limit, and then a whole lot of legislative requirements and tax problems and things come in. So if you're sitting with 60 billion, that's never going to happen. And when you're seeing things happen politically, perhaps in the country that's concerning you, and you want to get more of your wealth outside the country, an easier way to do it, and of course there's legislative requirements and processes you need to go through, is externalizing your assets. And so how do you do it? You list on a stock exchange like the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and your shares become German shares. So your 60 billion becomes essentially German money. So your money's outside the country in a fell swoop like that. So in a sense, it's not illegal. It's not illegal. It's perfectly legal. Nothing funny about it. If you go through all the right hoops and ticks and boxes, you can do it. And many people do it and continue to do so. I think maybe on that note, I want to read has any of you bought the book? Well, like 5 of you. I think I might just leave with 5 of you and go have coffee. Gee whiz. It's really interesting. You guys need to get this book. Okay, so then I'm going to read chapters and chapters for you, because apparently only a few of you have done so. I'm taking a step aside, and what really started interesting me was corporates globally, what companies do to make more money. It's fascinating. I went into a little rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland, and sadly didn't have enough time. But it was fascinating to find what companies do around the world. Again, it's not illegal. But the question that we've got to start asking ourselves is, when are you not in the spirit of the law anymore? You might be in the letter of the law. But surely, the kind of tricks and gadgets and games these companies are playing, when is it not on anymore? And I'll speak a bit about that later. But so let me give you an example, because Steinhoff isn't the only company doing these funny shenanigans. So what they did was they registered a new company in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in 2015. So an interesting point is this isn't a South African company, which is another part of the reason seems nobody wants to do anything about this whole mess. Because whose jurisdiction is it anyway? They registered this company in the Netherlands, and they incorporated the whole bunch into it. And then they listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange in December 2015. So that's when I started looking into the Netherlands, because did you know that 14 out of the top 20 companies on the JSE have entities or are now registered in the Netherlands? Did you know that? Isn't that interesting? Now have a listen to this. So what I'm saying is it's not only South African companies. This is a global thing. And the Netherlands and the UK, but the Netherlands largely, have become known as tax conduits. So they refuse to consider themselves to be seen as tax havens, although they are certainly, in my view, facilitating things that needs greater attention. And so what they do is, if you've got a lot of money and you're a company, I'm trying to dumb it down and make it easy to understand, for myself, by the way, you register an entity in the Netherlands, you send all your money there, and from there it goes to the tax haven countries. And this is a fact. It goes to the Cayman Islands, it goes to Luxembourg or wherever. And so the countries of origin are losing out on this massive tax what they should be collecting. So let me just read 1 or 2 little interesting things to you. So according to the IMF, the Netherlands has the most substantial investment flow globally, greater than larger countries with larger economies like the US, China, and Germany. So more money is flowing into the Netherlands. So more money is flowing in there than flowing into China. This is according to the IMF. I couldn't believe it either. Of course, it doesn't stay there. It goes somewhere else then. But that's what the IMF says. The reason for this is the profusion of shell companies, they say. Let me give you an example. The largest brewery in the world, which took over SAB Miller in 2016, is Anheuser-Busch. Anheuser-Busch, well, it links into this story because they also go via the Netherlands, amongst others. But Anheuser-Busch consists of 680 different companies. And they are all involved, they are all listed and registered in 60 different countries around the world. Isn't that interesting? Here's another interesting thing, Google. So between 2007 and 2009, Google, which is a US company, moved most of its profits earned outside the US to Bermuda. That's $12.5 billion at the time, 2007, 2009. The effective, they moved it to Bermuda via the Netherlands. And Google paid 2.4% tax to the US government that year on that money. 2.4%. Isn't that incredible? The other point I wanted to make was this. Yeah, it's another example, Walmart. So Walmart's in South Africa, they own Massmart, which owns all the macros, for example. So there's another angle there. In the Netherlands, Walmart has 5 companies. They don't have a single shop in the Netherlands, not one, but they've got 5 companies there, which has a total value of $12.5 billion. This was in 2015. There's not one Walmart shop. So how do companies, how does the world understand these kind of issues? I mean, this is happening. A lot of it is very whip and blood. The last point I want to make is that there was an estimated 14,000 shell companies in the Netherlands today. So the argument is that these companies are going to places like the Netherlands and they're registering these entities and they are using it to channel money elsewhere. And I'm not saying it's illegal. And there's this massive imbalance going on in the world. If it's my wife, tell her I'm busy. Yes, sir.
Why do people send it to the Netherlands and then to somewhere else? Why can't they send it somewhere else?
Because it would be illegal in many countries to send money directly to Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. There's so many loopholes and things, and the people generally want to know, where's the money going, sir? What's it going to be used for? You want to transport $12 billion. So it's a lot different in countries like those. In other words, the Cayman Islands or Bermuda or Liechtenstein or Luxembourg was the example, even Switzerland, because of the arrangements between countries. But with the Netherlands, it's this magnanimous, we're friendly with everybody, we export cheese and clogs and we love you all, and people think they can't do any bad, and it's wonderful. Same with the UK, they're another one of these conduit countries. So it's the existing relationships and partnerships means that there's less loopholes. If I go and establish a company in the Netherlands, it's the Netherlands, there is nothing wrong there, great. But then from the Netherlands, it goes elsewhere. I hope that answers your question to some extent. So they register. Yes, ma'am.
So what are these shell companies? What are they actually set up for? If there's nothing,
They literally have a postbox. Many of them. You have a postbox. You might have Naspers. How many people? Well, how many people do you think? You're aware Naspers, and I'm not casting aspersions on Naspers, please, but you're aware that Naspers is now a Dutch company. They've got their headquarters there. How many people do you think works there? I think there's about 50 people. This massive, the CEO is a Dutchman. Bob van Dijk, I think is his name. Not illegal, but many of these companies, you will find they are enormous entities, global entities, and they have many of them. I think I name a few in the book. They literally end up and they find that there's literally a post box. So people send post and mail there, but it is the official registered address of that company. 14,000 of them in the Netherlands alone. So the Steinhoff listed in Germany, December 2015. And now what happened was, and the gentleman was talking about a warning sign in the trend lines. This was probably one of the first warning signs that happened. There was a raid by tax authorities, German tax authorities, 2 weeks before this listing in Germany. And that certainly gave that trend line a knock as well, because there was some uncertainty. And it was said, what the heck, there's tax problems, these guys, there's a thing, nobody really knows what it is, and it took a bit of a knock. So the explanation given by Mr. Jooster, interestingly, do you see him on that photo? So isn't that interesting as well? He claimed to have a squash injury. This is the greatest moment of his career. He's listing on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and he's got a squash injury that makes it impossible for him to attend the listing on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Come on, please. You'll see Mr. Dr. Visa there, on the second from the left. On the far left is Dani van der Merwe. He was the bedrijfsbestuurder, the managing officer he was basically Mr. Jooster's right-hand man for a number of years. He became the acting CEO after this whole crash. Next to Mr. Dr. Visa is Ben Lagranzi. He was about I think it was 39, 40 years old there. He was earning 50 million a year. Isn't that another warning sign? Where's the government employees pension fund? Where's the shareholders? Of course, Dr. Visa was one of the biggest, but there's many others. How do you, as a 40-year-old chartered accountant, earn 50 million rand? How? I mean, sure, maybe you're really fantastic, and you're really brilliant. And of course, I certainly am not advocating that people shouldn't be paid these exorbitant amounts. I am absolutely for that. If you're a whitey boson, like Christo Visa said before, I will pay him R1 billion because he's growing this company and doing amazing stuff. But yeah, you've got a chartered accountant, he's getting 50 million. And if you look at across the group, those senior executives were all getting not that level, but 8, 9 million for a young, recently trained chartered accountant. So they can't leave the company either because nobody can match your pay. Nobody. And what's interesting as well is the share options. So how these things work, and I heard this recently, so it's not in the book, and I hope I'm saying it correctly. But the senior management a lot of the value, so his 50 million, for instance, wouldn't be cash. It would be maybe 10 million cash and 40 million share options. And then you buy the share options, but you have to fork out cash immediately, a percentage of that. And so, of course, for those many millions, you don't have the cash. So a lot of these people hock their houses because Jooster would tell them, man, buy the share. This thing's growing. Look at it. 300% share price in 5 years. So a lot of these senior management, their packets were tied up into the company as well. And they were going in deeply into debt to buy those options immediately so that they have the value. Of course, the idea is in a few years you're going to make an absolute killing. And some of them did, but most of them have lost everything. So they couldn't leave because they were tied up. So here's another interesting point. Mr. Lagranzi, the CFO, in September 2017, Steinhoff also created a company called the Steinhoff African Retail. That's where they put the Pep Store Group. It's a newly listed JSE company. Who do you think was the CEO? At the same time that he was CFO of the Steinhoff Group, he becomes the CEO of another listed JSE company. Another warning sign, I would have thought. It's like, where are the people asking, but how are you going to manage this? It's two massive companies. You're the CFO of this big company. You want to be the CEO of this other massive subsidiary company. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, so yes, they had that raid. I don't want to go into too many of the other people. That's Len Konar in the middle. He was the chairman at the time. He sat on the board for 20 years and still claimed to be independent. 20 years from the time they listed in 1998. So there was the raid by the German tax authorities. So what did they find? To date, we don't know. So it's not only our authorities that are useless. The Germans, to date, haven't found anything either, really. They never really locked anybody up. What's interesting is Dr. Visa and Jooster, they claimed, man, it's nothing funny. This is somebody who has it in for us. It's so shortly before we're listing. Somebody went and said something to the authorities and they did a raid. We don't even know what it's about, but they do it on all the companies all the time. They just want more tax money. And everybody swallowed that and said, okay, yeah, that could be. And nothing came from it. So maybe that's why I think Dr. Visa so often could repeat that and say, man, this is ridiculous. This was a raid. Nothing came of it. So I'll just leave that there. That's just when they came to Parliament in January last year. On the bottom left is Heather Son, she's the current chairwoman, and of course Dani van der Merwe at the top. And you'll see Christo Visa, Johan van Zyl, and Steve Boyson over there. So I'm going to run through a bit of things because I'm at 40 minutes. I don't want to take up too much of your time. And if I jump around too much, I do apologize. So this is another interesting point, another structural problem, I think, in Steinhoff, which led to this whole smash, how this was even possible. So they have... Yes, sir. I'm going to get to that. Yes, I'll get to that. So what happened here is they are the... Excuse me, did somebody say something? Okay, sorry. So they are the only company in South Africa that operates using this structure. It's a two-tier board structure. So you have the management board at the top, and you have the supervisory board at the bottom. And essentially the management board would provide the information to the supervisory board. And some would have to say that should be a problem, because how do you know what information you're getting is reliable? But of course it's been signed off by the auditors. You have long-running partnerships with these guys at the top there. No reason not to trust them. So that is what the supervisory board has been on record saying, that we were lied to, we were misled, we were fed false information. That, interestingly, is a board structure that is used in Western Europe. And if you are aware of the Volkswagen emissions scandal, very many similarities to what happened at Steinhoff. This disconnect between the two tiers of the board. So that is certainly one part of the problem that managed why this was all possible. Yes, sir. Yes, correct. In Western Germany, it is more normal, yes. But they're the only ones here. And the experts that I've spoken to have said that it's actually, they would frown upon it. This is another interesting point, diversity. I certainly, whatever. But it is an important point. Diversity is important. And here is an example of that. If everybody on the board is the same person, if you are from the same courses and you all watch rugby and drink brandewijn and braaivleis, you all look the same, and you all know Marcus is the cleverest guy in the room and he's the guy swinging the most money around, then who are you to challenge him? Who are you to say, listen, Marcus, why the hell are you paying $64 for a mattress firm share? What's wrong with you? People don't do that when they think alike. It's the SPAC mentality, the herd mentality. So you need people who think differently, who look differently, who have other backgrounds. We do need that. I certainly think so. But that, again, a warning sign, I would think. How did they get away with, in a country where diversity is so important, looking like that for so many years? This is just a picture of the head offices in Stellenbosch. It was an interesting picture. I thought the golden chandelier there in the entrance entry, I'm going to show you where I think the problem is, but let me run back to the whistleblower story. So this whole company would have still been going on like it has even today if there wasn't a whistleblower. That's my view, and I think that's what's going to come out. But interestingly, this is September 2017, there was a guy called Andreas Seifert. The name might have come up. He's an Austrian furniture king, and he was the whistleblower. So he compiled a dossier of information. So Mr. Seifert isn't a nice guy either. He's just he was nailed by Jooste in previous transactions, and he decided he's going to get him back. So he's a shady character himself. But he compiled a dossier of information, which he dropped off at a number of places, including the Dutch authorities and Deloitte in the Netherlands. So it must also be remembered that when Steinhoff became a Dutch company, they became audited by Deloitte in the Netherlands, no longer Deloitte in South Africa. So that would have happened in 2015. So Mr. Seifert dropped this dossier of information off. So it's not black and white, X marks the spot kind of stuff. It's this looks funny, yes, there's weird business connections, and that's in a sense why we haven't also, I think, seen some real closure and clarity yet. It's a lot of, information, but it's not really pointing to something clearly. But it certainly alerted the authorities, and it alerted the Dutch branch of the Deloitte, who flew down immediately to Stellenbosch and called for a meeting, which they then held. So that was the whistleblower. Just some context on this gentleman. Mr. Jooste believes this entire mess is this guy's fault, and he says that in 2007, the Steinhoff Group started moving into Austria, where Mr. Seifert is, and he has a lot of furniture retailers. And Mr. Seifert, he says, he said this in Parliament, Mr. Seifert initially wanted them on board because he thought that they're going to get rid of the rest of the competition. And then Mr. Seifert realized, but hang on, Steinhoff's also going to be nailing his businesses. So they had a big falling out. And ever since there was this animosity. And Mr. Jooste certainly believes that this whole mess must be laid before Mr. Seifert's door. And so when Mr. Jooste, I'm sure you've seen the letter, he wrote a letter and said, it's all my fault, I'm sorry, I'm resigning, I've disappointed everyone. His claim is that letter points to his initial dealings with Seifert. He should never have got involved with that guy because this has led to the whole collapse. So he is not saying that he was guilty of anything or he's a criminal or he's committed fraud. He's saying, I'm terribly sorry, this business dealing was a bad idea, it was a dud with Mr. Seifert, and this is why we're in the trouble, and this is why I'm resigning. So that's what his letter basically, he says, alluded to. It wasn't a confession of wrongdoing. So where is the a bigger part of the mess? So where did the fraud happen? I think, again, it's not a forensic audit. I certainly hope that people look into this will see. I did some digging. This is what I think. So this is a basic structure of what the group looked like. And you'll see the Steinhoff African Retail, all the South African businesses are down here, over here. I don't think there's a problem there. And I don't think there's a problem. I think the problem is in that red area there. So it's Steinhoff Europe. So that's the Steinhoff Europe businesses. Those businesses have kept going, and they're pretty significant. But have a look. Well, look, this is my analysis. This is some information off Steinhoff Europe papers that I've received. And you'll notice that this group only has 5 employees. 5 employees. It's got a turnover, a retained earnings of 51 billion rand. It's got 5 people who work there, of which Marcus Jooste is one. Dirk Schreiber is another one, who's been prominent, and I think he's recently resigned. Bruno Steinhoff, Hein Odendaal, Frikkie Nel, and Stian Grobler. Very close confidants of Mr. Jooste. And if you look at the numbers going through this company, 78 billion receivables due. And that's where this whole thing, I think, where a lot of the numbers have been fudged, was over there. And it's interesting, this company was not audited by Deloitte. They were audited by a little mom-and-pop shop in Germany who'd been doing the books for, so many years. And how auditing works, some of you might know. I'm sorry if I'm not trying to teach you what you know. You can rely on the work done by other auditors. It's an accepted thing. You can do it. The question that Deloitte is going to have to answer, I suppose, if this premise of mine is correct, to what extent did they test the information they were getting from this auditing company in Austria? I think they're in Austria. I don't know. So they were getting information that was signed off by this little entity. So that's going to be interesting. I want to go. I want to go here, and then maybe I'll sketch some other bits. This is, I suppose, the biggest problem for me. Who watches the watchmen? That's what that Latin saying says. Who watches the watchmen? We all, and I speak for myself, we assume our investments, our money is being looked after well. We assume that people have our best interests at heart. We assume that stockbrokers and big pension managers and fund managers and whatever the heck you want to call them, we assume they know what they're doing. We assume they understand the companies they're investing in. We assume the regulators know what they're doing, and we assume SARS knows what they're doing. So so most of us don't tend to micromanage our money all the time. We put it in the hands of people we rely on and trust to look after our best interests. And I think what we've seen here, and what we've seen more often than we'd like to admit, is most of these people don't seem to know what they're doing. They follow trends, they follow patterns, they follow mandates. Many of the apologies given by many of the asset managers who fell for the Steinhoff share, they said, but we followed the mandates. So because of indexes and the top index, this was one of the top 10 companies on the JSE, and you are mandated to invest in it on behalf of your shareholders. If you don't want to invest, there's a whole other protocol and mesh you have to go through. So people were saying, well, let's just invest in the stock because we're mandated, and that's what the index says, and it's a great company. And we don't know that. We don't understand that. And I suppose that's a concern. I make the point there about state capture. So a lot of numbers get thrown around, a lot of money. People would have thought someone would have flagged some big numbers. If Marcus Jooste was stealing money, billions, millions, hundreds of millions, or shifting it out the country, surely someone would have said something. Well, state capture, 100 billion. So that's the comparison. They reckon state capture has cost the country about 100 billion. This mentioned the value wipeout has been about 3 times that. But state capture, the hawks, the banks, the private banks, for many years red flagged various accounts. And they said, hawks, listen, there's a problem. These people, there's big numbers moving through. Not once did the hawks go back to them. Not once. I mean, that's astounding. It's a massive indictment. And not to be a dampener this early in the year, but certainly the justice system in the country, in our country, has been completely destroyed. I think there's efforts to rebuild it, but there's underlying levels that it will at best take a lot of effort to clean out. And sadly, that's just a fact. So let me point out one little fact. Who's the best place to investigate something like this? The Hawks. The Hawks has a commercial crimes unit. Which is even more specialized than the Hawks, which is the priority crimes unit. How many CAs, auditors, do you think the Hawks commercial crimes unit has in permanent service? Any guesses? None. Not one. Not one. I'm not making it up. The last one to leave was in 2016, was a white chap. I also found out recently. So the Hawks have been saying we never had people. They're also lying about that. There's not one there. The boss of the Hawks came to see me. I gave him some copies of the book, and I'm not denigrating the guy. I'm sure he's got wonderful qualities. He didn't understand. This is the head of the commercial crimes unit. He didn't understand debits and credits. And it's not, I'm not joking. I understand he's got other specialties. But for me, that was shocking. Shocking. I had to try to explain basic things to him, and I'm not. It's not that I misunderstood him. I think that he was there with good intentions, and he was trying to understand all of this. This was about June, July, August last year. But and those are the experts who should be tackling white collar crime. There's nobody. Do we still have prosecutors who can adequately prosecute a case like this? Of course, I'm sure there are wonderful people in all of our entities. Few and far, I believe, unfortunately. But you're going to be going up against billionaires who's got legal teams all the way to Timbuktu, experts from all spheres of life who are going to be running rings around you if you're not prepared for them. So that's what I'm talking about in this imbalance. And it's a global imbalance. Globally, companies and people with money can do this kind of stuff because the states, the governments they're not talking to each other, they're not investing in their people, they're not investing in their equipment. This is simply a fact. And we are all being robbed blind by people like this. And our hard-earned savings and investments are going into this. And one day when we retire and we say, but, oh hell, I've got less than I thought I would have. How many times have we heard that? So many times. So many times. And my concern is how many other companies are there where there's shenanigans like this that we're unaware of? Things that it's simply not being picked up on. It's a concern to me. There was something else I wanted to mention. I'm going to end off on my favorite story. I think let's take some questions. Are there any questions? Yes, sir. So PwC they are doing a full forensic audit. They've been working non-stop since early last year. And they were meant to have been done by December, at the end of calendar year last year. So there's been a postponement. They're now saying April. So we'll see. We'll see. Yes, ma'am, at the back there.
What can the individual do, especially if you're a government pensioner?
What can the individual do, especially if you're a government pensioner? Ma'am, I don't know. Read up a bit more, try to understand where your money is going, try to be more hands-on, where are you invested, get another opinion, speak to 2 or 3 stockbrokers. Even clever people were done in by this. So I don't have all the answers, but certainly try and be a bit more involved, try and be a bit more diversified. And then, those of us who can try to put some pressure on governments and try to say, listen, upskill your people, upskill your services, make sure that this kind of thing can't happen, that we are protected. Yes, there was another question there. And then I'll come to that side. Yes, sir.
Do you think the shares are worth anything, or do you think they're going to zero?
I can't comment. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not. It would have to be up to each and every person to make that decision.
So then, since your book was published, what's the most surprising piece of information that you think's come out?
The most surprising thing, it remains the fact that nobody's been charged or arrested. I mean, every day I'm still surprised by that. It's pretty incredible. There's many interesting things that came out since the Techie Town fallout. There's a whole industrial sabotage going on there between the guy who was part of the Steinhoff group, sold Techie Town, and then after the smash, he suddenly realized his shares he'd gotten are worth nothing. So he said, well, bugger you. He started copying all the hard drives, all the contacts, got rid of that. I'm making it very simple. Created a new company called Mr. Techie, shut the warehouses that Techie Town are supposed to have been using with locks. That was very interesting and one that still is worth watching. Yes, over there, sir.
At what point did their costs start to exceed their income?
At what point?
At what point did their costs start to exceed their income?
The Steinhoff groups.
You got broke when you got more money going out than you got money coming in.
They were getting a lot of loans still coming in. So they always had money. Don't think they didn't have money. They were getting a lot of money coming in. The excellent question, though, is cash flow. Remember, when you look at, and the other interesting point is cash flow. So why did they want PEP and ShopRite? Because of cash flow. I think they were starting to run into some cash flow problems, and you've got all of these shops, wonderful cash flow businesses. I don't know if I've got the answer for you right now, sir. So they weren't running out of money that I saw. I think that they kept buying new companies and getting a lot of money to buy those companies, but via obtuse structures. So somebody's getting cuts, and then you buy that company and you throw. So in other words, this year I'm a furniture retailer, then I go and buy a mattress firm, then I go and buy a car manufacturing company or a logistics company. So the business never looks the same. That's another warning, by the way. Try and invest, I would suggest, into companies where you know what they do. What is their business?